I was going to do an endgame puzzle today, followed by 5 games. We got a good set of things lined up for today. Yeah, since people are interested in rook and pawn endgames, we can do another one of those. This should be interesting, I think. This is number 739, from Basic Chess Endgames, and possibly another one if we have enough time. This should be pretty interesting. 739 from Basic Chess Endgames is a classic. It's Lasker Levenfish. I think this is I don't know, if not a world championship game, definitely a high-level game. Very old game. Many of the end games are very old. Basically one of the things about these super old end games is, we have better analysis tools than we did, 100 years ago. But in terms of the actual complexity of the position, there's nothing particularly, fashion specific about it. One of the things about chess openings is basically that people end up, using new openings over time. So, they'll have an idea where, they'll have this opening and this will be in fashion for a while. Then someone will find a refutation, and then the opening, the highest level openings at GM level will shift. But a lot of the rook and pawn end games are pretty much the same as they were 100 years ago. So that's what makes an old, often public domain end game book really really just fine for current analysis. So anyways, I wanted to take a look at 739. Here, basically, this is this is the Lasker game. And basically the concept here is that Lasker's trying to set up a passed rook pawn as a defensive white. We have the same situation as we did yesterday, where basically, black can always seize the opposition in a situation like this. The h4 rook, or the a4 rook can't move, but the a7 rook can move. Basically, the idea is, hey, good morning, Aphelion, welcome. But basically, the idea behind these types of rook and pawn openings is that the rook that's behind the pawn can burn tempo as needed. And good morning, Kiro. Thanks for being here. And the rook in front of the pawn can't move. So basically, at any point here, in a king, rook, and pawn endgame, the king can seize opposition if he's the one whose rook is behind the pawn as opposed to in front of the pawn. Because this a4 pawn, or this a4 rook, basically has to move in time, so it can never pick up tempo. But this a7 rook, if the opposition is ever unfavorable, can bounce around on this file. Like, it can go a6, a8, a7, a6 if that picks up a tempo for it. So anyways, basically the issue here is that f5, and then black has a choice. He can either play g takes f5, which provides this this defensive resource for white, and on the other side, e takes f5. E takes f5. This idea is also going to allow white to get a defensive, basically use a pawn advance on the rook file as a defense. Basically, the goal of having a pawn move on the rook file is, white needs counterplay here. The issue for white in this starting situation is that black has a passed pawn and white does not have a passed pawn. If white can also get a passed pawn, he's going to be able to, force this rook to start using, using effort and time in order to stop the passed pawn. So basically, getting this rook pawn to be passed is the goal of the situation for white. And Lasker can successfully do this with f5. So basically f5, and then g takes f5, white gets this instantly. This is clearly bad. If this gets played, basically this rook is going to be forced to a8 and forced, rook takes h8 almost immediately. So that's not the defense. But the maneuver instead from white is on e takes, which is clearly better because this pawn is still not passed. E takes, e6, pawn takes, king takes, king b5, and the rook does have to go back. But the point of the point of this is, basically white is able to get the black rook off of the defense of this a5 pawn and off of the defense of the other pawns, and he's able to do it quick enough that he wins, he's basically he wins the goal of making the rook have to give up the defense. So here king takes g6. And I just want to show this maneuver again because I think it's something that might be useful. If you're in a losing rook and pawn endgame like this, what you can do is create a passed pawn, and if each side has a passed pawn, then the advantage of the side with one extra pawn is less pronounced. That's basically the goal here. That's basically the concept. So f5, g takes, h up. That's an idea. f5, e takes, e6, pawn takes, king takes pawn. You know, there's some things about this position that are a little bit unusual. Like, it's sort of unusual that, interesting. That's very cool, Kiro. But yeah, so, the main point of the, you know, the main point of the thing here is that you're basically securing a, you know, you're basically securing extra, compensating, pass pawn here. Yeah, you know, it shows really the value of a high-level teacher, doesn't it? You know, most people aren't so lucky to be able to interact with grandmasters. You know, I would say 95% of chess lessons are given with people who are, you know, 1800 or below. So it's lucky that that the internet kind of allows us to do that now. But very good point, Kira. Thank you for you know, raising that point. But yeah, you know, it's kind of amazing though. I don't know. I'm such a tech nerd that I'm always like wondering about this. But basically, you know, on the internet, you can interact with the grandmaster whenever you want, right? Isn't that cool? Whereas, like, in a live chess class, you know, you basically will never do that. You know, I would say a great majority of, you know, chess, chess concessions have 0 GMs or IMs on staff, or even masters on staff in most cases. So you raise a really good point, Kiro. And yeah, no, it's really great. I'm stunned by tech because it makes things so global. You know, in the old days, you wouldn't have been. You know, you'd have to pay money to play in a you know, a simul with a GM. Yeah, that's awesome, Kiro. No, it's really cool. The thing about that is basically, like, in the old days, you'd have to pay money to play a simul against a GM, and then you wouldn't get to do anything with them afterwards. Now you can just go on the GM's free live stream and interact with them immediately. I mean, it just puts the old, like, model, it just like destroys it. So you know, it's just great. It's awesome that the internet can just do these things now. So you're raising a great point, Kiro. And I really feel good about tech's ability to displace the old tuition models, just because you know, you're raising such an interesting point. But that's really cool. I'm really happy that you got to play a GM. I'm sure you learned a lot because that's a very high-level player. And yeah, it really just shows how much we've advanced and how much kind of we're in need of an advance here. So yeah, thanks for raising that, Kiro. And yeah. Well, wait, I mean, you know, enough that you're bringing it up on mine, so certainly some, right? But yeah, no, I think it just blows up the old model. It's crazy how much better that is. But isn't that cool, Kiro? I really appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah, no, I think it's just dead in the water is the main point. But anyways, you're bringing up no, I'm teasing you, but you're bringing up a really good point. The whole thing is just, you know, the model's really going to change, because this GM, who in the old days you would have paid, you know, $25-50 to play in a simul with, you know, you can just talk to live on the stream and have them demonstrate lines or whatever. So it really shows how just the old models just, it's amazing that it's held on this long, but it's not long for this world. Anyways, Kiro, thank you very much for bringing up the point. And you know, good eyes, really. So I do think, no, I'm teasing you, but I think you're bringing up a really good point. And you know, it really demonstrates how, you know, much is about to change. And I'm very excited about this. You know, really, it makes me feel so much better that that chess is going to be, you know, basically, you know, done at scale for free. And everyone is going to have a chess education. That makes me really happy, Kiro. So I appreciate you bringing up the point, and I appreciate you kind of offering me this natural position to get up on my soapbox. But as a tech fanatic, this is actually really interesting and a really good point that you're raising. It's amazing that you can go onto the stream and get a free lesson from a GM. Like, how cool is that? In the old days, people would have paid so much money for that, and now it's completely free. So you're really making a good point, Kiro, and I appreciate you bringing it up. Yeah, every time you bring it up, I get an awesome opportunity to have a dialogue about this. But you're really bringing up how basically the model has fundamentally changed, I wouldn't. So please keep bringing these things up. I love talking about it because I'm so excited. But yeah, really good point, Kiro. And it does sort of indicate when you're playing a GM for free on the stream how dead in the water the old model is. Anyways, thanks for bringing it up, Kiro. Always feel free to bring it up. I'm super interested in this topic, maybe more interested than my audience is. But I get very excited when you bring up things like this because it really does demonstrate how much things are about to change. Yeah, no, it's epic. It's awesome, Kiro. It's so cool. Like, it's so cool that, just all of this chess material is free, and it can really, show how, it really shows how much better things are than they used to be. It's amazing that the old model has lasted so long, is really the conclusion. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing. You can just go on the internet, get a free lesson and a free dialogue with the Grandmaster, and that's available and free. So I don't know how anything else can compete with that, Kiro. But you're bringing up an awesome point. Super curious, and I really appreciate you bringing it up. Thank you very much for the follow, boy, and yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you for the follow. Thank you for joining the stream. But yeah, so anyways, this endgame, I sort of want to move more into the area of general content. So this endgame basically is gonna show a real key concept here, which is basically if you get a passed pawn, you basically if you get a passed pawn, you can basically equalize the game as white. So basically, black is going to end up, black is going to end up with this. No, not at all, Amet. Your game, I believe, was last night. Or no, sorry, you had one yesterday morning. During the yesterday morning stream, you can go back and watch that video on demand. And you also, if black sacks the rook and have two connected passed pawns. Yeah, so that's basically, I think, the best opportunity for black here. But let's just go through the opening once again. Basically, the point is, if you get this h pawn, if you get this h pawn passed, then this a pawn is less impressive as a passed pawn. So that's the main point of White's endgame play here. So this is basically an obviously worse line. Here, White just basically seizes the initiative with h5, h6, and the other direction. White plays e6, pawn takes, king takes g6, and you get the pass pawn this way, at the cost of an extra pawn. So if we go through the full line, there's really a, there's basically maneuvers that allow White to kind of equalize here. So if f4 here, then you get this full line, h5, and then the rook takes this pawn, and the pawns are no longer connected. The lucky part of this position, and why this, one cool thing about this position is it's not contrived, but it offers an opportunity to look at kind of an extreme type of endgame. Is basically with these h pawns, basically with this h pawn passed, and this rook pawn only on the file, only on the a5 file. Basically this rook pawn's only on the a5 file. If this pawn was further advanced, this rook wouldn't have time to leave the file, take pawns, and come back. So that's really the key differentiation here. Rook takes, rook there, and now, basically with that strategy, yeah, so rook e1, rook e7, king f6, rook h7. So, yeah, exactly. So rook e1, rook e7. Yeah, we can play it through for sure. Rook e1, rook e7, king f6, rook h7. And here, I guess you would probably play king to g, rook to e5 check, rook king to b4, h4 maybe. I probably can't do it full. I probably can't. Rook e1 after e5 is pushed. Yeah, let's just take a look. So rook a1, f4, h5, This is the game here. I just want to play the full game line front to back, but then we'll go back to yours, Gobar. Thanks for bringing it up. But yeah, pawn takes e6, pawn takes e6, king takes g6, king b5, and here you're saying rook e1, rook e7, d1, rook e7. Here I think okay, e5. Well, it's white to move, so that's yeah. So I would say h6 first, and then e5 here, right? h7, e4, h7, and then if rook to e8, rook takes e4. If rook takes here, then king takes e3, king there, and then both of these pawns are stuck, right? So there, king there, and both of these pawns are still stuck. So there, king takes, a2, king takes, and draw. Yeah, sure. Let's take a look. We can. Thanks for bringing it up, Gobar. So here, this is the original variation. So rook e1 here. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Turtles. I appreciate it. Rook e7 here. Okay, this is the line you're interested in looking at. Okay, cool. H5. My question is, I don't think you play king f6 there. I don't think it's that helpful to play king f6. H5, not rook e1. Okay, h5. This still should be equal. So h5, and then what's the plan? e5 here? Okay. Rook e1, right? Rook e7, h6, and say, what, f3 here maybe? f3 probably looks the best to me. But here, h7, and then if takes, so then what? h7 here, right? Rook e8, in which case you play rook takes e5, rook takes h7, king takes h7, e4, rook takes, or f2, so either e4, rook takes e4, and then if f2, then rook to f4. If f2, then rook to f1, and then this pawn's gonna fall. But basically, my point is that the king's gonna be able to get in. So rook f1, a4, or e4, it doesn't really matter. a4, rook takes, e4. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, I mean, doomed in the sense that he draws. But yes, absolutely, Gobar. Yeah, no, I mean, that's the point of this endgame. It's a forced draw. But anyways, really good point, Gobar. Thank you for bringing it up. Please, yeah, if you guys have any sidelines, I'm super happy to go through them for sure. And yeah, no, thank you very much for bringing that up. But yeah, no, I'm happy to go through the sidelines. You're raising a good point. If anyone else has any, please raise them. But yeah, so it's I mean, it's a draw. You know, the position is defined by way better players than me to be a draw. But here, e takes, e6, pawn takes, king takes. But the point of the position is basically if you're able to create a passed pawn for white, black's passed pawn is a lot less, is a lot less dangerous. So king b5, rook a1, f4, and then you're passing the pawn, but the rook's, the rook provides defense quickly enough. So yeah, so it, doomed to a draw. That's the worst case scenario. Anyways, interesting. I was wondering if we would get through one or two endgame puzzles because I'm still kind of working out the timing on these. But if anyone else has any puzzles, please, or if anyone else has any more questions, always feel free to ask questions. But now I know the timing for these puzzles a little bit better. Pawn takes e6, king g7, and it plays through. I'm gonna go through the full endgame. In this, this is one line. There's another line that's basically. Yeah, absolutely, Kiro. What opening would you like to take a look at? This it would be May 19th at 10 a.m. Eastern. Pawn takes e6, pawn takes, and I just want to go through the actual sideline here. King takes, king b5, rook a1, f4, h5, e5, rook e1, and basically this takes with check is a key tempo, and this ends up playing out to this win. But if you take a look, sure, yeah, sure. We'll add it. I'm not familiar, to be completely honest. I don't know that variation, Kiro, but it should be, yeah. Note boom at 10 a.m. Eastern time. Sure. If it's something someone else has already done, I am sort of like, meh, but I'll still do it. Note boom, Queen's Gambit. Anyways, or sorry, you know what? I'm gonna add it for 6:05 p.m. Eastern on May 19th, just because I already have an intro on the 10th, or at the during the 10 a.m. session. Anyways, so cool. Very interesting game. You know, basically, if anyone wants to take a look at this, either with engine analysis, this is the position. Just so we know, this is position 739, Lasker 11 Fish, Moscow 1925. Yeah, sure. You know, I think, yeah, we can do that, Gobar. We can. I'll put some time aside. I'm sort of trying to figure out how to do this. You know, basically, yeah, absolutely, Gobar. We can take a look at it. If you send it on Discord, for sure. Not now, but you know, we have a lot of other games to cover during this session, but we can definitely get to it eventually, Gobar. There's a lot of people in line, so you know, I want to try to go pretty much with the order things came in. Anyways, let's take this game. It's Rat Hot Dog playing black. White plays this bishop c4. I don't know what they call this opening, but you know, it's a very early bishop to c4. We've talked a little bit about this. Basically, this bishop on c4 is not super strong if e5 hasn't been played. It's sometimes playable in the Sicilian Grand Prix because you know, White will have an f4, f5 resource in order to break this e6 here. But with bishop to c4, this, you know, basically this is too early to play bishop to c4. You know, I've tried these types of openings in the Sicilian or heavy, you know, basically heavy pressure on bishop to c4 out of the Sicilian. And the issue is just black can shut them down too easily with e6 and d5. If that happens, e6 and d5, this bishop will have to find a different diagonal, in which case this bishop will move to a different, you know, basically move to a different space. So yeah, so I would say e6, d5, shut down the early bishop to c4. If it's a Sicilian line in which e5 is played, then by all means play bishop to c4. If it's a, you know, the Grand Prix attack in which you can sort of retrieve an attack on f7 with an f4, f5 push, then that ends up being pretty strong for White as well. But yeah, bishop to c4 runs into issues because that diagonal, you know, can't really be maintained very effectively by White. Black plays e6 in most lines, and then you know, both the bishop is running into e6, and then e5 and then d5 can sometimes be played supported with tempo by Black. So, anyways, not a fan of bishop c4. I know that we're looking at this game from Black's perspective, but I always want to illustrate that bishop c4 in the Sicilian prior to e5 is usually an error. Bishop to b5, bishop takes, knight takes. And yeah, basically here, you know, we've kind of gone into unusual theory. I mean, bishop to c4 kind of narrows the, you know, narrows the number of games. The early d5 I don't think is bad, but it's not the most common opening play here. I think fundamentally it's fine. I'm kind of going to turn on the eval and see if it's much worse, but I actually think it's fine. This looks good. D5, e takes d5, e takes d5. A6 is the O'Kelly variation, right? Or the super early A6. Do you think I should play A6? I don't know. I think e6 is right. I mean, if you look at the most commonly played openings here, e6 is by far the most common. Knight to c6 is also okay. With knight to c6, you can do things like play an early a5, but I would play e6. I mean, basic a6 after e6. Maybe. I don't know. I guess I would say there's not really much reason to play a6 in the sense that this bishop is not really getting bishop is sort of not that helpful on that diagonal anyways, so I'm not sure I would put more time in as black to try to attack the bishop on c4. A6 and b5 are an expansion on the queen side, but I don't think they need to be played this immediately. Right now, I think your best idea is like knight to c6, probably. Knight to c6 challenges the center and holds the d4 pawn, and d6 as well. Ends up with a, hey, thank you very much for the follow, Chess. I really appreciate it. Thanks. But basically, d6, d6 is actually the main line here. I'm not a huge fan of d6. I think that d6 provides limited extra utility. I mean, you're already sort of, ready to play d5. So, so knight to c6 here, I like. I like even d5, which is what was played, more than I like a6, to be honest. D6, or d5, and you're basically pushing for quick development. You can get the knight to c6. You can play knight f6, bishop e6, bishop d6. The pieces here are pretty good. You're gonna get quick development as black. Here I would just push for something that well, yeah, I mean, I think that's the main. I think that's the main idea. I think you basically need to develop. The thing is, chasing the bishop. I think if you can chase it with developing moves, then by all means, it's good. Definitely a good idea to chase the bishop with developing moves. But the problem with a6 is it doesn't do much except for chase the bishop. No, I look, I'm stoked for these guys. I think they should just move into instructional streams and just blow everyone out. Like I'm excited. I'm actually the thing about Hikaru is that I'm very happy for these guys. I think they should switch into more tuition heavy material and then just take all the market share away from basically amateur teaching programs, or low level teaching programs. Chess instruction should be done at scale. So I'm happy whenever. I'm actually really happy whenever the high level streamers do well, because sooner or later they're going to figure out that they should move into an instruction heavy business model, and then we'll see that market change. So that's my so I'm actually really happy to hear about those viewer numbers. I figure that they really are a great opportunity to make a big large scale change. Sooner or later, the top level streamers are going to find out that they should move into an instructional stream, and then when they do that, they're going to basically be out. I don't know. I mean, the market share size on after school chess programs is something along the lines of like 5% of students times $1,000 a year times 10 million students. So I'm amazed that those high level streamers haven't just moved into it. It would take so long for everyone else to catch up. They should just move into free instructional streams and just end that market. But whatever. For now, this is the free stream that you're getting. This is the free lesson stream that we have access to, and I'm very happy to be displaced by a higher level IM or GM. That's my thinking there. I'm really just trying to move things forward as opposed to worry too much about the streamer mentality. Some high-level streamer is going to displace this stream. That will make me very happy, to be honest, because it'll mean that people will have access to free chess resources. But yeah, you keep raising these points, Kiro. Super happy to talk about them, and the more you bring them up, the more I get this platform to talk about what I think's about to happen. So I'm happy to talk about it. Anyways. E6 running into this bishop, but yeah, I would aim more for straightforward development. Yeah, so knight to c6 here is, yeah, exactly, that's what I'm saying, Rats. I mean, I would be really happy if he was teaching too. Yeah, we'll see, Kira. But yeah, knight to c6, and basically I think pressure's going to get exerted on, pressure's going to get exerted on the center. D5, pawn takes, and yeah, basically black's developing well here, and Yeah, castles, bishop g5, h6. And here I think it's the real, this. So basically, I think that spending time chasing around the bishop that's already weak because of e6 is not a worthwhile use of time. But here, pawn takes, bishop there, and black ends up with a pretty solid general position. Castles is, castles, and black's up about black's about even. But bishop takes, I think, is the main error here. I think on knight takes f6, this thing's going to be pretty solid. Bishop takes hangs the d5 pawn. Yeah. It does, but you're hanging the d5 pawn, and you shouldn't do that. You're trading it for the b2 pawn, but that's not a good trade for black. So yeah, so h6, yeah, so the d5 pawn, and I think you're basically, you're basically fine. So yeah, knight takes d5 is, knight takes d5 is too big a threat to play bishop takes f6. White misses it anyways, knight takes instead. But yeah, this I think is an improvement in the game. We can go through that line if you're interested. We can go through knight takes, bishop takes, rook to b2. Bishop has to go somewhere, and then rook takes b7. But yeah, I think this has got to be pretty good for white. Yeah, I mean, white's up about a pawn and a quarter, so that's too much. Anyways, castles h6, and then knight takes f6 is the improvement. So white misses it. Black is basically fine. These all look like reasonably straightforward moves. And yeah, I think black's got a pretty good play. Black's got a pretty good situation here. I'm wondering if there was a way to capitalize and turn it into a bigger lead for black, but certainly after bishop takes f6, yeah. Hey, welcome, Tarash. Thank you very much for joining the stream. But black's got a huge edge here. This is ultimately, this is ultimately just good. So improvements in this game. d5 is early. I don't have any problem with it, but it's not the main book move here. I'd probably play knight to c6. Knight takes, castles, d3. Yeah, let's take a look at the endgame. Knight takes f6 instead. Now black's going to be fine. White misses his main opportunity in this game. Bishop takes c3 is what the engine is pushing for. That's sort of interesting. Interesting. Cool. a6, rook takes, queen d2. And queen takes. So anyways, this is better for black. Yeah, awesome. But yeah, let's take it to the end game just to see. Yeah, knight and pawn endgame's tricky. Black has better pawn structure. I think black's goal here should really just be to activate his king as quickly as possible. I'd probably play king to f8, king e7, king to d6. Yeah, I would just keep playing as black. Basically, king f8 is what I think is the best opportunity. So I think moving forward on the king advancement is really the good idea. So yeah, in terms of ways to improve this game, this sort of move towards equality. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, unless I'm looking at a sideline or something, didn't you just win this game? This appears to be where the line ends, right? So, yeah. But here it looks like you're winning. Is this not the full game? Oh, with f6. Let's take a look. Interesting. I guess what I would say about f6 is that you know, my question is not why. You know, my question is like, why did you play f6? You know, f6 sort of. You know, f6 for white is not much of a threat. So black playing f6 just sort of, you know, it sort of wastes a tempo creating opportunity. No, I think you can just sort of play this out, right? I mean, you know, I'm referring to the engine for this, you know, for this analysis, but a5, and I think you can just sort of get through a pawn. Like say king e2, then b4, then a4 is an option, and if on a4 you can play king to d4 and then get the opposition. If you play pawn takes a4, you can play a takes b4 and get the opposition this way. So you know, I think having the I think basically you're having the opportunity to burn that tempo later is better than just burning it now. If you you know, if white ever tries to take that tempo instead, it's going to disrupt his pawn structure, and you're going to be able to take the pawn that white has now moved to f6. So here, like, I think basically black's just going to be better. So I would say f6 just isn't a useful move. You can just basically not play f6 and wind up with a you know, wind up with a better situation. Let white play f6 if he wants to play f6. If he plays f6, then you can go back and take that f6 pawn. Overall, black has the initiative here, and make sure, you know, really that you need to burn that tempo when you burn that tempo. An opportunity to burn this tempo later would be on something like a5, king to d2, or say king to e2, king to d4, king to d2. And then now it's, you know, basically black has the opposition, or white has the opposition, right? Then you can burn the tempo on f6 and go in the other way. Yeah, so a5 is definitely better than f6. The issue with f6 is it's never really a resource for white. So yeah, a5 and then king to d4. So yeah, it's a good point, Rats. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much for sending it. And yeah, I think basically you should hold on to the f6 opportunity until you know, until you have to play it. There's never an opportunity where f6 strengthens white's position, so you just should hold on to that from a fundamental perspective. This holding, you know, holding on to f6 is a good idea. So like here, king d6, a5, and then you know, if f6 is ever played, you know, you can just move towards it, and you know, there's no way that white's going to break through here. King takes, king e4, king to e6. This structure plays out well for black against white. Black has the opposition, and white's not going to be able to break through with his pawn structure against black. There's just no, they're not set up that way. So, anyways, hold on to f6 as a resource that you can play. Don't you know, trade unnecessary tempos. You know, here too, play like, you know, you could play king e5. I think. Though actually, yeah. So the issue is if you play king to e5, then pawn takes, and this pawn basically supports the defense of two pawns. Play a5, and these pawns, you know, won't be able to defend against the advance of more than one pawn. The issue with king to e5 immediately is that with b4, white holds on to basically both of these, the a and b pawns here. So overall, interesting situation. Yeah, definitely interested in this. And I think basically black's going to end up winning. You know, f6 though, hold on to that tempo. Even if you didn't, you still win this game. So nicely done. Good game. Thank you very much for sending it, Rats. And we'll keep looking at this. d5, bishop d7, and black's just good. Anyways, interesting game, Rats. In terms of improvements, I'd look at I would look at this bishop takes f6, hangs the d5 pawn, and then I think you're sort of aware of the other one, that f6 burns a tempo that you should hold on to. F6 is never playable for white, so you can just sort of play king e5, king f6, and be fine as black. So anyways, nicely done. Thank you very much for sending the game, rats, and yeah, good stuff. But yeah, f6, it's just that white never has f6 as a legitimate threat. If you line up the pawns with a5, you can make sure that the pawns only have one, one pawn defending each. So overall, I think this is good. Thank you very much for sending it, rats, and yeah, have a good one. Thank you very much for sending the game. Please keep sending them, and I hope this is helpful. Thanks a lot. Thank you. But yeah, so on to the next one. So f6 and that hanging d5 are the two most obvious errors in that game. And yeah, here's this game, Aphelion versus Canary. Yeah, no, thanks, rats. I like the idea of making endgames more of a focus. When I initially set this stream up, I was going to do endgames in the morning or endgames in the morning and openings in the evening, or some variation of that, and just have a lessons focused stream. I'm thinking of moving a little bit in that direction, maybe a mix, but overall, yeah, interesting stuff. Thanks for sending it. So let's take a look at this game from Aphelion. Looks very equal for a long time, so we'll see. Yeah, black plays an early a6 here. In terms of commonness of play, a6 is most common on the 5th move, right? Bishop c4 starts to get played more and more frequently here. I've noticed that, but I wouldn't play it unless f4 is also played. In which case, white can sort of reclaim the c4 to f7 diagonal. And yeah, basically I think, all this sort of makes sense. I'll take a look to see if there's any tactical, opportunities that come up, but this basically looks like a relatively mainline Sicilian. We're still in 500 games at move 10, so yeah, very mainline stuff. King b1 is given as the main move here. I don't know, super interested in king b1. I guess, I would wait until rook c8 or some legitimate pressures placed on the queen side before you play rook to a1. But yeah, rook c8, b5, and now I get more into playing like king b1. I would wait until rook c8 is played to play king b1. Here, bishop to d3. I'm sort of not big on bishop to d3. I think bishop to d3 basically, it's not really that productive a diagonal. I would at least open up this diagonal before playing bishop to d3. I think the issue with bishop to d3 is just, it makes sense. Like, I like the idea of getting the bishop to d3 eventually. It has, utility on this square. Basically, this bishop's defending c2, and this bishop is pushing through to h7. But yeah, after castles, g4, h4. And yeah, I would play something. I guess I would play something like f4 here. But bishop to d3 this early, there's no guarantee that that diagonal ever becomes open. So that's something to consider in terms of this development. I like the idea of developing in general, but this bishop, where to place it. I get it. Like, quick development is a good fundamental concept. But I would start pushing, in this particular case, I think it's better to hold off. This is anti-fundamental, so I'm trying to come up, basically, anti-fundamental move. But I think the best route forward here is to start advancing with your pawns, and kind of starting this attack. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that black is going to castle queenside here, or sorry, kingside here. And I think what you do is you move your pawns forward and then wait for the best diagonal to, become clear, and then play the bishop to that diagonal. So like with f4, depending on what black plays, the best diagonal for this bishop could end up being e2. It could end up being d3. But here it's a little bit unclear. And the difference between the bishop being on a good diagonal and the bishop being on a bad diagonal is big enough that something like bishop to d3 is is a little bit committal without knowing that this diagonal is going to be a good one. So yeah, bishop to d3, castles, h4, and yeah, here basically I think allowing knight to c4 is kind of dangerous. You might as well play. I think basically there's this pawn hanging there too. This does also allow knight to c4, but here clearing out that pawn is worth it. Queen e3 I don't think is basically an efficient enough move. I would play bishop takes h4 here, and you're up a pawn, and then you'll still get threatened with knight to c4, but you can play rook to g1, and then you can play queen to g2, and you'll be able to exert pressure on the king side. So I would take that back and play bishop takes h4 and get this pressure on the king side here. So g3, g6, white is fine. So yeah, anyways, interesting thing that happened. Basically, this is an opportunity for white that just is a tactical thing. But I think recognizing that this h4 pawn is hanging to a backward rook, sometimes it's hard to see these backward piece moves. But bishop takes h4, solidifies things as white. There will be potential for discovered checks here that are kind of interesting. Like here, I sort of wonder about knight takes e5, and then there's this discovery on this bishop. Here, I guess bishop takes, and then queen takes d6, right? So it doesn't win the e4. I was wondering about the tactic knight takes e4, but yeah, here bishop takes h4, and then knight to c4, and then is fine. But knight takes e4 is not an effective tactic because in response to the e4 pawn getting hung, the d6 pawn gets hung. That's what I was wondering about. Anyways, looking more at this, so bishop takes h4 looks good for white. The opportunity to play bishop takes 4 goes away after knight to h7. So this was an improvement. So far in this game, I'm thinking the improvements here probably were bishop d3 is committing to a diagonal that you don't know is going to be good for the bishop yet. It's anti-fundamental, but in this case, what you do is you play pawns up and wait for the correct diagonal to be known, and then you play the bishop to that diagonal. I know you're delaying developing here, and developing in general is always a good thing, but that's a more effective way to play in this particular case. And then the h4 pawn was available to be taken by the bishop here. So yeah. This looks good. Queen c3 I don't think is too effective. I guess you're threatening the c4 pawn, but in order to take the c4 pawn, you're going to need to free up this defense, so you'd need to play b3 or something anyways. So queen to c3, I think this plan is not fully developed. If queen to c3, if queen to c3, you're wanting to take c4, but you can't because the mate is there on b2. So you need to take a lot of moves to fix that. I would just play something like, I don't know, maybe rook f1, f4, something like that. But queen to c4 doesn't really pose a real threat because the c4 pawn isn't actually hanging. So I would spend this move doing something else. The engine suggesting king a1, rook to b1. That makes sense. Then you can actually play queen to c3 because the b2 pawn is defended. That's an idea. Other ideas include rook to f1, f4. But yeah, I think overall this ends up being fairly good for white. And yeah. Interesting. Cool. So in this situation, what are your advancements here? I think basically this game played out reasonably well. I don't think you made a ton of errors, but bishop d3 should be placed, or the white squared bishop should be placed on the best diagonal, and d3 is not obviously that at this point. Bishop takes h4 looks good, and knight to d5 also was probably a little bit ambitious here. Knight to d5 is fine. I understand taking the outpost here, but the rook's just gonna take it, and I think rook takes is probably better than pawn takes here. With rook takes here, you're still getting a piece on this outpost. It becomes a little bit easily attacked by this knight on f6, but that outpost, basically this d5 pawn outpost is not really that great. It's vulnerable to like rook to c5. I don't know. But yeah, overall, there's a few tactical improvements here. This situation gets very dangerous for white on the queen side. Yeah. But yeah, so I think everything was fine. Bishop to d3 was somewhat of an inefficient play. g4 was fine. h4 is the biggest mistake that black makes, I think. Queen e3, just take the hanging pawn on h4 and you're in good place. And then here, this whole thought was probably not that effective. I like f4 better. I think basically, you're getting attacked on the king side or on the queen side here, so I think your best plan is probably to start a counterattack on the king side. But I would play f4 probably. And yeah, black just sort of runs into difficulties. It's aggressive, the attacks are aggressive. So I just want to go through the positions for improvement here. The biggest positions for improvement are bishop to d3 is not an efficient use of the bishop move. More efficient is to establish the correct diagonal and play there. Taking this h4 pawn, and yeah, the knight to d5 was not, basically I want to, knight to d5 was not the most efficient, but basically I want to summarize it in a more cohesive way, which is basically I think you need a you need a kingside attack to offset the queenside attack here. With this, you're sort of you're playing a lot of moves on the queen side and you're not really advancing anything for yourself. With that kind of strategy, your best goal is to sort of it's a strategy in which you're just playing a lot of moves defensively, hoping that white makes a tactical error attacking the queen side. I think in general, what you want to do is start attacking. So I know I know that you play attacking games sometimes. So I think your best idea here is f4 and f5 and g5, and really start attacking this. Really start attacking this king side. I think your opportunity is basically to to press hard on the basically press hard on the king side, and play your play defensive moves on the queen side as necessary. There's enough of kind of proactive defensive moves being played. Let me give an example. Like on the queen side, I think queen e3 is not super efficient, but that's not necessarily a defensive move. And then this moves in the center weren't that great. So what I would say is, really stick to attacking on the king side. Here, instead of this knight d5 center plan, move to an f4 king side based plan, and you'll be in better shape. So counterattack was the main point of this game, the main improvement that white could make here. There are other smaller things, but the larger strategic plan was move to a counterattack instead of playing in the middle. I also probably wouldn't have played knight to e2. You can play f4 without knight to e2. Let's see how that works. But yeah, overall interesting game. And f4, either before or after knight to e2 is the correct plan forward instead of knight to e5, knight to d5. But interesting. I think it points out a good point about developing that bishop. This is a rare case where you want to hold off on your development so you know that you're making the best development. F4 here looks like a good plan. But yeah, anyways, yeah, no, I understand, but I think really here, knight c3 is not a bad place for that knight. I would just leave it for defense, bring the other knight to c3. Yeah, I know, I understand, but honestly, this is sort of just a question of, where to focus on the board, and I think you're better off focusing on the king side here. Black is attacking you hard on the queen side. I think you can tactically maneuver out of it, but that's where the attack is. And the play in general, I think, is better to do on, basically getting a counter attack here. Something that will make white have to spend resources, not playing on the queen side. Yeah, no. So I think that if you shoot for the king side attack earlier, you're pushing on that flank first, and that will end up being a better way to play. F4, F5, G5 are good moves for white, and I think that's gonna play out well for white. So here, not much. I don't think you can do. The center, the knight outpost is good. I mean, technically it does improve the knight, but this attack, black can almost just sort of ignore if he wants. Bishop takes is also fine. This bishop's sort of not doing too much, so you can just sort of trade it off. But the issue is here, black is basically showing a good edge. I would instead go with like F4, knight takes F4 here. But yeah, counterattack as opposed to playing in the center provides white with better chances. You can sort of duck out tactically. You can play king c1 if the pressure on b2 ever becomes too high. But yeah, that's the plan. And now black gets his attack going too quickly. But overall, good game, Aphelion. The main things that I would decide on are, basically this bishop to d3 is kind of, this bishop to d3 commits your bishop to a diagonal that may or may not be the best one, and then start the attack on the king side much sooner. Don't worry about the center so much. Just counterattack because black has an attack on you. That's a better plan. But yeah, thank you very much for sending the game in, Aphelion. I really appreciate it, and yeah, thanks for being on the stream. Interesting stuff. I know this was a USCF rated game. I played this game. I played this tournament as well, and yeah, it was an interesting one. I think I lost to Sarkar in that one, but it was an interesting tournament, and yeah, I really like those USCF ones on chess.com. Been playing those for a long time, and have had a lot of interesting games. I like it because people take those games pretty seriously. You get kind of a higher level quality of play sometimes than your normal blitz games. And yeah, 3-5 is good. So yeah, so this is RV Phil's game. RV Phil is playing the Caro-Kann. His opponent is playing F3, and basically I think probably a better basically knight F3 is a weird Caro-Kann move. Not bad necessarily, but runs into d5, and it can transpose into like the Panov, or it can transpose into a few different ones. But pawn takes, d4, and yeah, I mean, if white wants to play c4, it becomes a Panov type position. Here e6, but overall I like black's position here. Yeah, no, I mean, it was an interesting tournament. Sarkar's usually the best guy that I see play on those tournaments on a regular basis. He's a good player. He's beaten me over the board a bunch of times. Good player. I should maybe take a look at my game against him. That would be interesting. But I like the chess.com USCF rated ones. Those are always fun. But yeah, Exchange Caro-Kann I'm not a huge fan of. I think basically it fixes a few of the really bad problems that black can encounter in the Caro-Kann. It makes knight c6 playable, it makes bishop f5 playable, and black ends up with pretty good development in a relatively open position. Yeah, I mean, I just sort of like Black's position here. White still has the initiative. White's a move ahead, but the pressure that Black's getting on this position is generally good. Um, Queen to b6, castles, pawn takes. Overall, I just like Black's position. E6 is probably a good idea. I think, yeah, e6 is probably better than knight d7. The issue with knight d7 is that it sort of undevelops your knight. This will probably trade off fine, but I think that this bishop has some mobility restrictions. So I think you're better off just playing e6 and then potentially bishop takes c5. I like that better. E6 and then this pressure. If you play bishop takes c5, it'll take pawn takes c5, and overall, I think that this will end up in a better position for black. Uh, so yeah, bishop f4 does create vulnerability there, but it does here too. So I don't know. E6. E6 is better. E6, bishop f4. This does look dangerous, but I think that you can just sort of comfortably play bishop d6 and counter the white bishop there. Yeah, so I wouldn't move pieces back. I don't think it's worth undeveloping your knight here. I think you can just play e6 and black will be fine. Yeah, so e6 is stronger. I like it. This ends up playing out great for black anyways, but I would have just transposed this differently. I wouldn't bother on developing the knight. Keep the knight there. Play e6. If bishop plays f4, play bishop to d6, and I think this is a better way to kind of manage the minor pieces and end this position. White's overextending, I think. There's going to be vulnerabilities if bishop takes c5 and this knight isn't defended. So yeah, I think you can just kind of ignore how advanced white is for a move or two, and play developing moves. Knight d7 is undeveloping. I think fundamentally e6 is better, and allows you quicker development of your dark squared bishop. This is all good. Black ends up in a good position. The way that this played out, knight takes c4, and then I think knight to, I don't know. So after knight to c4, I think knight g6 is better. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Alan. Appreciate it. Thank you. Knight g6 is a good tactical move for white. This was missed by black. So pawn takes c4 is an error or this was missed by white. Knight to c4 is an error for or pawn takes c4 is an error for white. On knight g6, this position is better for white. So playing this way and regaining the rook regaining the rook and having a double attack on the queen and the rook. This is a tactical improvement for white. Overall, yeah, you're focusing on something that's real, which is basically this knight is in trouble on c5. But instead, e6, bishop d6, and black is better. So yeah, knight d7 is an error. E6 is better. E6 followed by bishop d6 is the plan for black. Just keep your pieces moving forward, is my advice. These knights look very scary in the way that they're posted, but I think you can just sort of ignore it and nothing terrible happens to you. That's important. Overall, this plays out great. White missed the key tactic, knight g6, and knight d. Basically, you end up playing e6 and taking this hanging pawn. Awesome. I mean, h3 is an error. I think basically something to defend this pawn probably. Queen to d4 looks good to me. Bishop e3 also looks good to me, but white shouldn't let this pawn hang. You're in great shape after the pawn hangs. Nice. Yeah, and this looks pretty crushing. You know, you get a piece up. Um, where did white mismanage this? White just hangs a piece in this exchange. So yeah, nice, and then you're kind of smooth sailing after that. Anyways, in terms of improving this position for black, I guess I would say, you know, the main point here is, like, I think all of this was fine for black. This all made sense. And the only real error here for black in this game was undeveloping the knight. Play e6, be ready to play bishop takes c5 or bishop to d6 as white needs. Or you know, basically, e6 is a way of moving, basically dealing with some of the similar problems without undeveloping your knight. This is a forward-looking move that solves your problems, and knight to d7 is a less forward-looking move that solves your problems. So e6, I think, and is good, is better for black. Bishop d6 on bishop f4, and other than that, I think black played an excellent game. You know, basically after that, you're sort of closing out. White hangs a pawn on c4, c5, and yeah, good stuff. So yeah, nicely done for black. Really, yeah, strong, smart play. This was all good. The development was quick for black. You know, I think the exchange Caro-Kann is generally just bad, but yeah, the only suggestion I'd make is play e6 because it's a more forward-looking developing move. You know, I understand though that you want to challenge these outposted knights as soon as possible, but if you hold off for just one extra move, you end up in the same end position with better development. But otherwise, RV Phil, excellent game. I think you made very few errors, good tactical closing, really just generally strong. Nicely played. That's the only move that I take issue with. Everything else I think was good, and you got a very solid and well-deserved win. Nice, good job. Thank you very much for sending the game in, RV Phil. I really appreciate it. And yeah, nice. Really interesting stuff. Really cool game. And yeah, good thinking. Refutation of the exchange Caro-Kann, which I think is not the best opening for white. Thanks for sending the game, RV Phil. Please keep sending them. Really appreciate it. Thanks for being here and watching the stream. Cool. Next game is Alaya. And here, let's take a look. B3, interesting. I just want to make sure, or actually, sorry, I think this is Steelo Jones's game. I sometimes get people's names confused. White plays this early flank opening, and I think your best response to that is just good, solid development, good, solid center control, and you'll end up in a way better position. When a big center pawn opening plays against basically plays against a flank opening, the best path forward is for the person with the big center to, to advance in the middle and develop more quickly and more healthily than white does. Bishop to b2, knight c6, bishop to c5, and d5, and basically black is in solid place. I play knight c6, so in keeping with that line, I would play moves that don't commit you to less aggressive developing moves. The issue with d6 is that it defends the pawn right, but it causes problems with this dark squared bishop's development. You want to develop the center. You don't want to overextend, but you want to develop the center as solidly as possible, as quickly as possible. So something like knight c6, d5, bishop d6, f5, knight f6 is going to provide a great central structure for you. It'll be like playing the white against the modern, and that will end up well provided that you don't overextend. White's offering you an opportunity to get better spatial control and better center control. As he does, and as a flank opening player does in modern openings. Here, I just think if you accept that and then you don't move, you don't overextend the center at all, you'll end up in a good place. So yeah, I think this is good. I would play knight c6 probably. Yeah, knight c6 is better as determined by the engine. Just develop. White's sort of. I guess my suggestion for you out of this opening is make this look less like the Italian game and make this look more like the modern. Knight c6, d5, f5, knight f6, bishop d6, bishop e6. Get black a huge center, and I think that he'll see a kind of a lasting edge. Black is already slightly equal or slightly better on the eval, but basically play it as if you were playing the modern, or playing against the modern as white. Flank opening. That's I think the best way to deal with flank openings. Just take the center, take the space advantage, and then don't overextend. This ends up looking something like the modern, or ends up looking something like the Italian game. It's a little bit unusual. The pieces are not super organized. So I would just go with changing the middle game strategy up. Your opponent's giving you an opportunity to take the center and take space. Just go with that. Play knight c6, bishop c5, d5, and keep everything solid for black. Now I think black's, I don't know. I think basically the pieces didn't, this sort of didn't form a cohesive plan for black. In this situation, with this bishop is sort of displaced. I mean, it has some value in defending f7, but I think you really need a plan. My suggestion here is to play b5, a5, and get a very quick attack going along this white king side or queen side. You'll have opportunities with like bishop to g6, bishop to e7, and queen to c7, but I just don't see this as being super organized here. You're doing stuff like, bishop e7. Like bishop e7 doesn't really do too much. Potentially could provide a defensive resource, but overall, I don't know. This looks sort of, this attack never really materialized. Now you're in sort of an early end game, and one that's not super obviously better for you. This sort of just traded off into an equal-ish endgame. Let's go through, and in fact, kind of a problematic endgame because, you're going to have a dark squared bishop versus dark squared bishop, and all of your pawns are going to be on the dark squared bishop squares. So let's talk more about this in terms of, larger concepts as opposed to specific tactics. On bishop to b2, knight c6, or even, knight c6, bishop c5, make white transpose this into an awkward Italian game. But if he doesn't, really be quick to turn this into a favorable version of the center, or a version of a big center against modern flank openings. Bishop g5 I don't think does, or bishop g4 I don't think does too much. I think you want to keep. I think basically moving the bishop to g4 should come after a pin. Here it just gets pushed back with f3, which doesn't do much to negatively impact white's position. Now the bishop's kind of displaced. Pretty accurate. But yeah, this is sort of a problem. The engine is evaluating this as fine for black, but this is a very dangerous endgame for you. I'm not sure exactly how to play this. Your pawn structure is better in that you have 2 pawn islands versus 4, so that's going to be helpful. But this, basically this dark squared pawn structure is really dangerous. You're basically going to have to make sure that this white bishop never gets in. If it gets into f8, you're pretty much going to lose. So that's something to really be careful about. I'd probably play bishop f8 here. But yeah, now white quickly jumps on this opportunity, and the game shifts, many points very quickly. This is a bad blunder. Just don't cede this middle ground to white. Play something like a5 probably, or even bishop to d6, but don't over push this and lose. Your pawn structure is naturally worse in this endgame. You both have dark squared bishops, and you can play stuff like bishop a6, bishop a3, bishop f8, e7, d6. Keep the bishop on that diagonal. Don't over push. Don't let white into your situation. Hold this pawn, or hold this square, this c4 square with your king, and you should be fine. But black has way bigger losing chances here than white does, actually. Even though the position is equal, this is an endgame that black can really err in. This king to c4 is a problem. This king to c6 is a problem, and an a6. Basically, a6 or quiet moves by black, moves of this bishop along this diagonal are the best. White's going to try to push you off of this diagonal, this f8 to a6, a3 diagonal, and if that happens, you just lose. This quickly ends. So that was the error. In terms of playing this game, the things that I'd look at are, try to make it into as much of a white's playing something similar to the modern as possible. Try to steer it in that direction with moves that expand quickly in the center and quick developing moves. This all seems reasonably fine. And then in the end game, you've played basically a pretty equal game. King takes d8 is actually... Bishop takes d8 is actually pretty dangerous. Bishop to a3 I think causes white gives black some serious problems. So I think both here and a little bit later are the two places to really focus on in terms of improving this game. This gets messed up. Basically you can't allow you can't allow this dark squared bishop onto the f8 a3 diagonal. If that happens, white's going to capitalize with bishop to a3, and that will be bad for black. An error. Never let white's bishop onto that long diagonal. Never let it get in through to f8, and black will draw. But don't over push this playing for a win, because this situation gets extremely dangerous really quickly. White has way better winning chances than black does, regardless of what the objective evaluation is. So two pieces there. Try to make it the modern instead of the Italian. And the second piece is watch and hold on to that dark squared diagonal between f8 and a6. Those are the arguments. Those are the things that I would take away from this game. And thank you very much for sending it. I really appreciate it. Thanks for thank you for sending the game in, Steve. And please keep sending these games. Last game is Natis's game. Natis is playing white. Natis basically plays the Italian game. Cool. Here, knight c3 is an option, c3, d3. I most prefer d3, but all of them are fine. I like d3 here, but knight c3 is okay. You sort of transpose into a d3-like position. This h6 pawn is not really a great move for black, in my opinion. I think h6 generally tends to create more problems for black than it solves. It creates a hook, and a hook that can really be bad for black post-castling. So I just develop as knight f6. If you have to play bishop e7 on bishop to g5, then that's fine. But h6 commits black to a slightly weaker king safety. It's not a good move. It's not what helps black. Let's keep looking. White's fine here, and what does white do to advance the situation? The pieces have traded off pretty well. I guess I'd be a little bit more reluctant to trade off the pieces as white. I would do things like, h3 is fine, g4, this bishop is hanging on g6, and now I would play, basically this trade was bad. Knight takes e5 wins a pawn, or knight takes d5. Knight to h4 is an error here. So the issue is with knight takes h4, you have this active attack from the queen onto h4, and that's going to be bad for that's going to be bad for black, or sorry, bad for white. The discovery here, too dangerous. So or sorry, knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, queen takes h4, pawn takes. So not knight takes e4 is the tactic. Knight takes e5 is the tactic. Knight takes d5 is the tactic. But yeah, with this happening, white's gonna end up losing a pawn, because on queen takes, pawn takes c6. Bishop takes c6 is now forced because this bishop is pinned. But basically, white's gonna lose a pawn in that exchange. Yeah, so interesting. Going back, knight to h4 is a tactical error. Ends up losing a pawn. From here, black's a little better. Black basically doesn't effectively execute on this queenside attack. After b4, this queenside is going to be stuck. And I would play something like rook, probably g5 and then rook to g1. That looks good to me. But overall, by this point, you have a slight advantage as white, but you don't really have much of an opportunity to improve. This a4 pawn is stuck, and this bishop is stuck to defending this a4 pawn. Now, it's tough to come up with kind of a late middle game plan for white. There aren't really that many pieces available to advance anything, so you can sort of try to move things forward with attacks. Like queen to g1 is what's getting suggested. Queen to f2 is pretty similar. Attacking this b6 pawn being the point. But I guess queen g1 is good because then you can play g5. I guess queen g1 with threats of g5 and threats of queen takes b6. That's probably the best idea. b5 gets played, a takes b5, queen takes, and then either queen a7, but I'm sort of curious about g5 here. Anyways, I think this ends up being, good for white, or so sorry, good for white, but basically, it's relatively equals. Rook to c8 allows for queen takes b6 uncompensated. That's huge. This was a winning move for white, I think, or close to a winning move. Queen takes b6, and white's in good shape. But overall, I think, yeah, white's just kind of going well. The Yeah, so this converted well for white. Good win overall. The things that I would have changed here, knight to h4 allows knight takes d5, winning the exchange, or winning the pawn. So on knight takes d5, e takes d5, queen takes h4, bishop takes c5 is correct. Otherwise, if pawn takes c6, bishop takes e3, and that's deadly for black. So bishop takes c5 is good vision, good eyes, and you can play bishop to e3 after after knight to e7. And overall, this ends up with a bishop pair against a black, but a worse pawn structure and a vulnerable pawn on d5. So yeah, white's looking good. And yeah, I don't think there's. I think black overextends in his attack here. Black does have some opportunities. Queen e2 is ambitious, but if black just holds on to his pawn structure here, black will get a reasonably good position. He should play something like queen takes on bishop c4. He should definitely play queen takes a4. On queen to f2, he should probably play b5 and start to try to make some headway on this queenside attack. The kingside attack just doesn't do much. Basically b5 and this a4 pawn is getting threatened. But overall, b4 pushing in on this, on this queenside. That's the idea. Queen b4, pawn takes b5, queen takes b5, and black will be and black will be good. So that's my argument there. I think this is a better continuation for black. Should white have gone for a more aggressive kingside attack? I think is my question. Here, like things like g5 and then a rook, d rook to g1 seem a lot more challenging. Just this general, like, all these trades, this trading set b6 and then rook takes e1. White had sort of an initiative here, so I think it's better for him to keep the pieces on. After this looks really kind of drawish for me as white. White might still have a slight objective lead, but this looks like a game where white doesn't have tremendous winning chances. So here, like just in a general position here, I think white should go for a more, kind of more passive or sort of more aggressive attack that involves less trading. Moves like queen to f2, which will save everything, are better than the plan of rook e1 and then trade off everything for white. This objectively is not better for white. The pawn situation is equal. White has a worse pawn structure, so trading should not be white's goal. These trades didn't play out super well, so just leave it alone. You'll be fine. White's good. Anyways, nicely done. Good end up winning. Black overpushed his ideas. And just to give an itemized list of things to take a look at for the next, just as takeaways for this game. Knight to h4 falls to a tactical knight takes d5. This all looks kind of rough, and then just from a conceptual perspective, don't trade off pieces here. Start attacking g5, h5, rooks to the g file, and set up a traditional attack on the black king side. Will give you an advantage. Objectively, it's good, and you have practical compensation, so better for white. Nicely done. Good job winning this game. I think it headed too much in a drawing direction after you traded off the bishop for the knight. But overall, I think you had a very interesting situation. I think you had opportunities as white, and eventually, black made errors that allowed you to win. But I think holding onto the pieces and trying to roll over your opponent with pressure is a better strategy in this situation. Don't trade off the bishop. Don't trade off the bishop for the knight. Just keep everything on the board and try to make an attack materialize on the king side. That's the strategic component of this game. And I think one of the things that would help your chances of winning. You won anyways, so awesome, great job, good playing, good tactical execution. But you would have had I think more solid win with just a steamroller type attack on the king side in this situation. All of your pieces are faced towards the king side, and I think basically other than this light squared bishop, and this is going to end up with a better situation for you. So, anyways, very interesting situation. Thank you for sending the game, Natisse, and very curious and interested in seeing this. Thanks for sending the game, Natisse. Please keep sending them. Always interested in seeing how your games are going. The strategic component is something that I think you can do well. Just play an aggressive tactical attack, and don't trade off. Don't trade off if you're not solidly up. This position, the pawns are equal. Trading doesn't really help white. Be a little bit more optimistic of your attack's ability to break through. That's my recommendation here. I think it makes the game in general makes a lot of sense. It was pretty accurately played. I don't really have too much to add except for that tactical change on h4, and overall a very interesting game. Thank you very much for sending it in, Natisse. Really appreciate it, and I'm excited to see more from you. Thanks for joining the stream. Thank you very much for sending material in, and really appreciate you doing that. Thanks a lot. Have a good day, Natisse, and I'll see you later. Thank you. Bye.